Yarnivores Fiber Spider, back again with part 2 of my Kaleidoscope Granny Crochet Along. And the response that I got from the first video is so heartwarming. I love you guys and I love your comments, and I'm appreciative that you're appreciative because we're all in this together. So let's get started with our new set of triangles. And I'm going to start with my charcoal for this segment, and we are going to get right down to business. Okay, so pulled out some yarn, and of course I'm going to have to pull out quite a bit, but hey, that is the nature of the beast, right? Right. All right, so just as we did with the first set of triangles, we're going to skip to the right. Now, this is, of course, our center hole, and we're going to go 3 to the right. So that's 1, 2, and 3, inserting our hook into that stitch, pulling up our yarn, if I can do such a thing. Does get caught on the plies occasionally, but that's all right. We always get there, don't we? All right. So we pulled up the yarn, we do a chain 1, and then into that same stitch, we do a single crochet to lock everything in. All right. And then into that center, we're going to do our 3 double crochets, like so. And then a chain 2, because this is going to be the corner, if you recall from our previous triangles. So that's 2 and 3. All right. So we've got the beginning of our corner here, and then we chain 1. And we are going to skip over to the 3rd stitch. So this is 1 here, 2, 3. And we do a slip stitch into that stitch. Okay. Then we're going to do a chain 2 because I want to do more than 1 row of this color. So we're going to chain 2 and go into the 3rd once again. So that's, well, the chain stitch counts as a stitch. So that's 1, 2, 3. So into the middle here. And we're going to do a single crochet into that stitch. So this chaining here counts as our first double crochet. So then when we turn our work, like so, into this space down here, we're going to do 2 more double crochets to finish up that cluster, chain 1, and then into this chain 2 space, we're going to do another double cluster. So that's 3 double crochets separated by a chain 2 space into the space right now. Chain 2. And 3 double crochets into here. All right, there we go. Then we chain 1, and then into this space down here that we created, we're going to do our cluster. So that's 1, 2, and 3. Okay. Chain 1, and then we go over 3 stitches. The chain 1 space counts as a stitch. That's 1, 2, and 3. So into the middle, we do a slip stitch, and that is it for this color. All right. And so we cut our yarn, and we pull out our loop, and we're good. Okay. And we turn our work back to the front. Okay. And now we grab our second color. See, now what I'm doing is I thought about this a little when I was deciding what color I wanted to do. I know I probably should have said this beforehand, but because we have white here and white in the center, I thought it might be neat to continue on with the charcoal to start with, and now I'm going to do the orange. And then, I'm going to introduce the green. Now we get a little pizzazz snazz going on there. So, we'll see how that looks. I don't really have a tremendous plan going on here, but I thought, to an extent, I'm going to wing it with a little bit of creative license. All right, so now, grabbing my orange yarn here. All right, so now we went into this middle stitch here. So we have to skip over to the third. So that's 1, 2, and 3. So it's the first stitch of this cluster. We're going inside of there. And we're going to pull up our yarn like so. Chain 1 and do a single crochet into that same stitch. Like so. And then into this space here, we're going to do our cluster. And you want to make sure that that gray yarn, in my case, is a little bit taut, not too loose. And so we're doing our first cluster into this space there. Ta-da! And then we chain 1, do a cluster into the next chain 1 space. There we go. Chain 1, 2 clusters, because this is the corner here. So it's 3 double crochets, chain 2, 3 double crochets. There we go. Chain 2. And 3 double crochets. Now, what I noticed during my last filming was that my video editor is not able to deal with rather large files, so I'm going to have to do cuts along the way. But I'm not going to skip around, no. I'm going to try to maintain being faithful to this crochet along as best I can. So we have our 2 clusters here, a chain 2 in between, chain 1, another cluster, and then 1 more cluster, and then we're going to turn. All right, so into this space down here, we're going to do our last cluster of this row. Oops, hello. There we go. And then we chain 1, go into the third, so that's 1 here. Chain space counts as 1, and then 1 there with a slip stitch. See, and if you look on this side, it is into the first of that cluster, and into this one, it is the mirror image, the first of this cluster. Okay, so we're making some really good progress already, aren't we? All right, let me just stop and restart. Okay. Okay, so now to continue along, because again, I want to do more than 1 row of this orange, because I would like to keep it consistent down here with the thickness of the colors, at least for now. So I did that slip stitch into there. So now we chain 2, 1 and 2, and then into the third stitch again. So that's 1, 2, and 3. So into that chain stitch, okay, we're going to do a single crochet. Now, of course, this can be a little bit tricky, but I am determined, and I'm sure that most of you know that about me by now. There we go. So into that stitch, going to do a single crochet stitch, like so, and then we turn our work, and then into this space down here, we finish up our cluster. Chain 1 into the chain 1 space, another cluster, like so. Chain 1, same deal. All right. Chain 1, 2 clusters in the corner up here. Okay. Chain 2. Finish off with a second cluster. There we go. And continue on doing our clusters down the edge here. Okay. All right, and then our last cluster is going to be right down into that space. So that's 1, and I need more yarn. All right, that's 1, 2, hello. Come on, work with me. 2, and 3. All right, then we chain 1, and then into the third stitch again. So this is our first one, 1, 2, and 3. Back into that chain stitch. Okay. Ooh, scandalous, I know. Let's see if we can do this. All right, not bad. And we do a slip stitch. Shaboom. All right, and then we cut our yarn once more. And now going to change my yarn once again. And we're going to finish up the rest of this triangle with our third color. And in this case, the green. Ooh, haha. I'm like a kid in a candy store. I know, I'm silly, but, you know, hey. So be it, right? If we're not having fun, why are we doing this, right? All right, so I'm going to get set up, and then we'll get started in on the next segment. All right, so once more, into the breech, dear friends. Okay, so now we were in the chain stitch here, so we're going to go 3 over. So that's 1, 2, and 3, like so. And we're going to pull up our yarn, chain 1, and you guessed it, single crochet into that same stitch. All right, pull that a little, pull this a little, and then pull our orange just a little. All right, So now, into that same space there, I'm going to do our first cluster. There we go. One more double crochet to finish the cluster. Chain 1, cluster into the next chain 1 space, chain 1, cluster into the next chain 1 space, here we go, chain 1, and cluster into that space. Okay, and then into our corner we do our 2 clusters separated by a chain 2 space. There we go. Chain 2 and our cluster. Okay, rock on. All right, so now we go down the other side as we typically would. Nothing new there, right? You know, I do very much hope that you all are getting used to how this pattern works itself. I mean, of course, every time you do a set of triangles, the triangles are going to be bigger, therefore you're going to have more rows to contend with, and then you can really start to play around with your color. You can even do stripes if you wish. Although, of course, yes, you end up with that many more ends to sew in. All right, so now we've got one more cluster to go. So we chain 1, and into this space down in here, we do our final cluster for this row. And and then we chain 1, go over 3 stitches. Now we were in the chain space there, so it's 1, 2, and 3, like so, with a slip stitch, and then we chain 2, 1, 2, and then we go over to the 3rd stitch, so that's the chain space counts as 1, of course, so that's 1, 2, and 3. And we're going to do a single crochet into there, and then we're going to turn our work, and we're going to go back into this first stitch here, well, the first space, excuse me, and we have our first cluster. Chain 1, do another cluster into that chain space, okay. Now, before I go any further, see, I understand how it could be a little confusing because you're like, wait a minute, what about this corner here? Well, see, the next round that we do, it's going to be elevated a little bit, and that way we can do our slip stitch, our chains and slip stitches over, and then crochet through this layer and the layer above. It may seem a little odd right now, but it'll make sense, okay? Because, yes, the first set of triangles, it was 4. So you would think, oh, this one would be 6. Actually, I counted on my previous example, it's actually 7. So we're going to keep going and finish up this round and do the last round, and then that'll be the end of our first triangle segment. Okay. All right, so we're going to continue right along where we were at by doing our clusters going up the side. 3 double crochets, chain 1 space, 3 double crochets, chain 1 space. At the end of this project, you will be dreaming about clusters of 3 double crochets and chain 1 spaces. Wahaha. But in a nice and happy, cute way. Because it's one of those projects where initially, I totally understand that it can be frustrating, but once you get the hang of it, it's like a dream come true, and then you create something visually stunning. So we're in the corner, so we've got our 1 cluster, chain 2, and then another cluster, do. Whoop. All right. Persistence pays off. There we go. All right, so then we do our stitches down along this side. Well, our clusters. Okay. Do. I hope you are all having a really good day today. Well, not just today, but every day, of course, but today was absolutely beautiful here at the time of filming. Today is June 1st, and the weather was stellar. Absolutely gorgeous. All right, and of course I hit a knot. There we go. Chain 1, another cluster. All right, and now we are just about there. All right, so now into this space we do our cluster. 1, 2, and 3. Okay, so now we chain 1, and then into the 3rd stitch we do our slip stitch. So that's 1, 2, and 3 into the middle one there, like so. Okay, and now because we have reached the end of the road, we're going to chain up 3, 1, 2, and 3, and then we turn our work. And into this space we do 2 more double crochets. All right, and then we chain 1. Next, chain 1 space, we do 3 double crochets. Chain 1. Three double crochets. Chain 1. Three more double crochets. Chain 1. 3 more double crochets. Okay, chain 1. Yeah, if you're not a fan of repetition, this pattern is not for you. Okay, we've reached the corner. So we do our 2 clusters separated by 2 chain stitches. 2 clusters. This is cluster, oops, hello. Cluster 1, chain 2. And then we do our second cluster. And speaking of clusters, there is a book that was made into a movie called The Fantastic Mr. Fox, and it is one of my favorites. I am a child at heart, I must say, and the movie was hysterical. I mean, there have been better adaptations of books into movies, but this one was really cute, and I appreciate that they don't use vulgarity, but they do make allusions, which I do find humorous. And when I was saying that, speaking of clusters, they always say, "Are you cussing at me?" "Yes, I'm cussing at you." And one of the lines that Mr. Fox says is, "This is one big cluster cuss." And I don't know, I think it's cute, I'm not a big fan of profanity, but the execution of the quip I thought was, I thought it was cute. It was a way of saying something without actually saying it, and sometimes that's, that's the funnier route to go. All right. And if I offended anybody just now, I do apologize, but I do love wordplay. All right, so now we have reached the end of the road, just about. All right, so we're going to do a cluster into here. Yes, I have a bit of an odd sense of humor, but some people dig it. Some people, they sort of smile and nod when they look at me. They're like, okay, he's getting weird. All right, so now this is actually the end of this triangle, because now what we would do is a chain one, and we would cut our yarn. But actually, to make it a little bit easier, I'm not going to do that chain one. I am just going to pull this out, and I'm going to cut my yarn and then pull out the loop. I find it just makes it a little bit easier. And it's just me. So don't need much of a tail. Snip, snip. And voila. So this is the end of our first triangle segment. Ta-da! Absolutely loving this, and I hope you guys are too. So now I'm going to do the next 3 of the triangle segments, one by one by one. And we're just going to keep going with this because it's just so much fun, and I love it. All right, be back in a flash.